and thanks for watching the in-depth comparison of the Google Nexus 9 and the Apple iPad Air 2. The first thing that we'll take a look at is the actual hardware itself. Both devices themselves feel pretty substantial in the hand. As far as size goes, the iPad Air is just ever so slightly taller and a little bit wider than the Google Nexus 9. Both devices are very thin, and even though the Air 2 is a little thinner, unless you're holding both in your hand at the same time, it would be very, very difficult to notice. Even though the Nexus 9 feels more substantial in the hand, it's not without its flaws. The power button and volume rocker, for instance, are nearly flush with the device, and they have very little travel, making it not only difficult to tell if you're hitting them, but which one you're even hitting. The iPad Air 2's buttons, however, are the complete opposite, where they are not only raised so that you can tell exactly where they are, but they have a very satisfying click, so that there's no mistaking that you actually pressed one. The back of the Nexus 9 is a soft touch rubber. For anyone who's had a Nexus 5, it will feel instantly familiar. It's very grippy, and it has a fantastically solid feel in the hand. The front of the device is devoid of all details except for two small slits for the speakers and a camera. The iPad Air 2 has an aluminum, cold, solid feeling back. The speakers are located at the bottom of the device, with the camera located in the center, the same place that the Nexus 9's camera is located. Apple's signature home button is back on the front of this device, with the exception being that this time it is a fingerprint sensor. Performance on these two devices, as one would expect, is phenomenal. I did, however, run into the occasional hiccup on both devices where they would freeze or stutter for a moment. Most of the freezing and stuttering occurs when opening and closing apps and not so much navigating the OS, leading me to believe that over time the issues will get ironed out. But it is worth mentioning that on both devices I've had to soft reset several times. The displays on both devices are fantastic, and it is really difficult to pick a winner here. Color reproduction is fantastic on both devices. Beautiful colors, bright whites, deep blacks. It seems, though, however, that the iPad Air 2's display has ever so slightly brighter reds, which I will try to show you here on camera. In addition to that, the blues on the iPad Air 2 also seem to be ever so slightly deeper. It's easy to nitpick when the devices are next to each other under comparison, although I have to say that neither one of the displays will make you unhappy. But if I had to give the edge to one of them, I would say the Apple iPad Air 2's display is ever so slightly nicer. As far as performance goes, both devices are very quick, and in my testing, it is very difficult to pick a winner since they would both go back and forth when it came to rendering web pages faster, although the iPad would win around 60% of the time, although again it is difficult to tell if that has more to do with how well Safari is optimized for the iPad. But again, this is one of those things that you notice when they are side by side. Performance on both is excellent, and both scrolling and the actual navigating around web pages is very fast on both. When you look at web browsing on the Nexus 9 versus other Android tablets, you can definitely tell that the aspect ratio, the 4:3, is much better suited to web browsing than any of the widescreen format tablets of the past. Text on both is very, very sharp, very crisp, and when I zoom in, it is very difficult to even see a single pixel on either, but that's expected at these crazy resolutions. Opening apps on both devices is very quick, although the way that the apps are developed on the Apple to include a splash screen really helps mask the apps loading up, and this same splash screen isn't present on the Android apps. which really draws attention to the fact that the apps are loading into the memory, versus on Apple, the way that the app will be instantly there after the splash screen masks the loading. Next up is the speaker quality. First, the Nexus 9. And now the Apple iPad Air 2. The front-facing speakers on the Nexus 9 are definitely loud and sound very deep, although the iPad Air 2 has a little bit crisper and louder of a sound. One thing that I noticed when I was playing videos on the Nexus is that when you pull down the notification bar, the videos and whatever else you're doing doesn't stop, whereas on the iPad, whenever you pull down the notification bar from the top, whatever you're doing pauses. Even though the iPad's sound is a little bit better than the Nexus, I found myself covering the speakers when I held it in different ways and muffling the sound, whereas that never happened on the Nexus. However, those volume keys on the Nexus do make it very difficult to change the volume on the device itself, so I would have to say that this one is a tie. Voice activation on both, as expected, is excellent. What's the weather like? Both Siri and Google Now are getting better as each day goes on, and it never fails to impress me when I use either service. How far away is Tanger outlets? One of the big changes that Google made with this version of the Nexus, though, is that it is always on, meaning that even if the screen is turned off, you can still say OK Google and activate the voice assistant, whereas Siri still requires the device to be plugged in for that kind of functionality. As far as benchmarking goes, this is another of the tests where both devices go back and forth. In most tests, however, the Apple scored higher on multi-core and the Nexus scored higher in single-core, although that wasn't true all of the time. For comparison's sake, I threw in a Core i7 Haswell laptop with the GeForce GTX 770, just so that you can see how close our mobile devices are getting to our PCs and laptops. Having used both of these devices for the better part of 2 weeks, I can say that they are both great. It is easy to tell, however, that Apple got the iPad right quite a few versions ago, and they have been doing iterative improvements ever since, whereas Google has been really struggling to get the tablet correct. Although I have to say that this effort, they are closer than they've ever been to really getting the perfect tablet device for Android. Because both of these devices are the respective companies' top of the line, I will be reviewing both of them simultaneously. And you can look forward to the review next week. Until then, I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.